I've known Deborah for quite some time. She's had incredible CFO leadership experience in building companies and having wonderful exits and seeding diversity and STEM leadership across Canada. In her early days with the Canadian Advanced Technology Association is actually where I met Deborah. And as she's continued in her career path, obviously.
You know what the cauliflower is for, though?
Cauliflowers. Who's ever, yeah, could you mute your line? Making me hungry, cauliflowers. Deborah has recently set up an organization to really, I think, drive her passion on leadership to secure more female representation on boards. And so, you know, she's now assembled a panel for discussion today, and she'll introduce the other speakers that we have here. So, Deborah, I'd like to turn things over to you to talk about how to get involved to advance leadership and diversity, and then also to bring on your distinguished panelists. And we'll have time to get into some Zoom breakouts as well in this session. So Deborah, over to you and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I sent you some slides. There we go. Thank you. Whew. I was like, I worked on those slides. Where are they? Anyway, pleasure to be able to speak today, and thank you, Siobhan, and also to Margie, you know, great foundational pieces, you know, music to my ears. It's what I talk about every day. I wrote a blog called Finding Your Voice in the Boardroom. I'm really focused around getting more women on boards. And so all of your foundational pieces and your commentary around, you know, we have to be bold, we have to step up, we have to support each other. And it's conversations I have each and every day. So I'm going to sort of set the stage. I've got some slides about kind of what's the data and what does it look like today in Canada and in the US and the trends that are going on with respect to diversity on boards. And then we're going to go into conversation. We've got Heather, Wendy, and Gary, and what we have some discussion, I'm sure, which will be very heated and very insightful. So Cindy, can I ask you to, yes, move forward? So there I am. Well, I do want to pause. Can we go back to the slide? That's my my corporate leather photo, and I have a corporate Chanel one. So it really depends on what day it is and what I want to look like. But what I do want to comment about is that I've been serving on boards for 20 years now as a corporate director. And the one common denominator on all of those boards is that I'm probably one, if not the only woman on a board. And I've served on private company boards, in technology, public company boards, in retail, consumer, most recently blockchain company. I've joined their board, and in the cannabis industry. And so I have a passion. My passion is good governance. My passion is about diversity and inclusion on boards. And yes, I have financial expertise, but I also have governance expertise. And so, you know what, I am not shy to raise my hand if I don't believe in, if there isn't equity or inclusion around the table. So anyway, this is a passion of mine. It's my life work. So the current trends, so the data that I'm going to present comes from, it's to do with TSX listed companies, and Osler's, a prominent law firm here in Canada. If you don't know them, they've been putting out a diversity disclosure practice since 2015. And so the data is referencing 2019 data that they would have gathered through all the proxy circulars that were that came out through the first 6 months of 2020. So that's where the data comes from. And TSX listed is small, micro cap, small cap, mid cap, big cap. Okay, so it's collective. There's over 700 companies in their database in the data that they do. But what I will say is women now hold just marginally over 20%. And that is as of 2019. They started tracking this in 2015, and it was at 12.5%. So, you know, in the course of 5 years or 6, you know, really 14, 15, over the course of 5 years, it really has not grown, you know, in any large substantive way. I mean, it's marginally, but Canadian larger companies are leading the way, large banks and large corporate entities. When you do it collectively for the S&P TSX 60, over 31.5% of women hold positions. And then there's still 18.5% of all male boards still exist on the TSX listed company. And I'd say shame on all of you. You know, there are very qualified women, so don't come back and say you can't find a woman. You just have not extended your network, or you haven't talked to Women Get on Board. That's what I'll tell you. 64% of all TSX listed companies have written board diversity policies, but it's kind of a misnomer, because in 2015, the Ontario Securities Commission had developed Comply and Explain policy, and that was where all TSX listed companies, they either had to say, you know, you comply, which is great because you've got diversity on your board as far as women at that time, or explain why. And, you know, I think over the period of time, companies have gotten very good in their disclosures, but there's still no impetus to really move that forward. It's great that you have a policy. It's great that it's in writing. It's great that you disclose it, but there's no consequences if you're not moving in a target, not unless you bring that, you set those targets yourself. And 47% of TSX listed companies have more than one woman director, which is great. We certainly know we can do better there. And then this is really appalling. And I think all of us can lean in on this front. Only 5% of TSX listed companies have women that are chairs. So we've got Katie Taylor at CIBC. We have Kate Stevenson, who's stepping up to be the chair at Katie Taylor, RBC. Kate Stevenson is stepping up in the springtime. She will be chair of CIBC. So two very prominent chairs for, you know, the banking, financial services. But, you know, that's where women do need to put up their hand. And I can tell you, I've been passed over to chair committees, and I have put my hand up and made sure that I wasn't forgotten next time. So, you know, it's part of your leadership role, and we should be setting paths to chairing boards. So move to the next slide, please, Cindy. At 26 companies, the CEO is a woman, so we can, less than 5% of TSX listed companies have female CEOs. The target for women directors has been, is when companies put a target, only 58.5% of those S&P TSX 60 companies have targets, and only 28.8% or less than 30% of the TSX listed companies. And then last year in January 2020, the Canadian Business Corporations Act, so CBCA, basically said public company board companies have to disclose, and they had to go beyond gender. They had to disclose in persons with disabilities. They had to disclose about Aboriginal and then visible minorities. And so this is the first year in 2019, looking backwards, that they actually were able to start tracking. And kind of that, I love the saying, I can't remember who said, I think it was Susanna, it was a treasure if you measure. I'm going to use that now. I love it. So it's a starting point, but you can see you certainly don't want to applaud those numbers. They can be much better. So when you talk about diversity, it goes beyond gender. It goes with diversity of thought. It goes with skills and expertise. It goes with geographic, ethnicity, race, you name it. And you know what? It makes good business sense. I actually just posted a blog today at a Women Get on Board on basically why a diverse board makes good business sense. And it really is. It really just is. And I wrote it back in 2017, and there's not one thing I would change about it, because at the end of the day, you know, it's good corporate citizenship, but it does make good business sense. So let's go to the next slide, Cindy. And then, you know, so there are advancements, and this is not at all, and I know we'll get into the panel discussion, this is not extensive of all of the different initiatives that are going on, but some organizations, some companies are tying executive compensation to the achievement of D&I goals. So it's being tied to comp. Institutional investors are updating their proxy voting guidelines and exercising voting rights, where chairs of nominating corporate governance committees, for instance, shares their voting will be withheld if there isn't diversity on the slate. There's the 50-30 challenges, and I know Wendy, the Ryerson Institute has been really instrumental working with the government on this, so we'll hopefully get a little bit more into that in the panel discussion. And then, which was so disappointing, and this came out just recently in the last couple of weeks, the Ontario Capital Markets Modernization Task Force sent out a consultation in July 2020. The results came out last week, and I'm just talking specifically on diversity. Instead of the regulators taking it on, they put it back into the hands of the shareholders after pushback from industry. So again, no hard direction from regulators. No, it's very soft, and it's really up to shareholders. So institutional investors can vote with their pockets, right? Because they're investing. They can withhold shares. That's really has impact. But the regulators are not making targets. They're not making any hard, age limits, term limits, or anything like that that can create change. So really the impetus goes back to the companies, tone at the top to create change, create the culture, create D&I, and lead by example. So let's go to the next slide. So that's on the Canadian side. On the US side, just lightly touched on a few matters with respect to really, Black communities and what's really driving initiatives. So in July 2020, California had lawsuits against Oracle, Facebook, and Qualcomm, and saying that the directors were breaching their fiduciary duty, failing to diversify their board, and monitoring compliance with anti-discrimination laws. So it was hitting hard on the board members themselves. September 2020, California approved legislations to require each public company that had offices located in the state of California to require a minimum to at least have one director from an underrepresented group. And the definition of underrepresented is below. They have to be self-identified as Black, African, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native, Hawaiian, Alaska Native, or who self-identifies gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. So they are looking for diversity. They're going deeper in diversity. And then, which I think is kind of a landmark, and people are still speculating on what the result will be. In December 2020, NASDAQ put a proposal to advance diversity, require companies to have or explain why they do not have at least 2 diverse directors. And the consequences will be, if they don't, they'll be delisted. However, this is the proposal. It still has to be approved by the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, but it's hard, measurable, and there are consequences. So there are trends going on. And I just, Cindy, you just asked me to talk about current trends in Canada and the US. So I just focused on that. I didn't go abroad. Some countries abroad are doing some great things on diversity and inclusion. I just focused on Canada and the US. At the end of the day, we all can do better. We all can be agents of change. We can make this happen. We don't have to rely on regulators, at least in Canada, because they're not stepping up. So let's not make excuses. Let's all lean in and make the change together. So Cindy, over to the next slide. So let's turn to our esteemed panelists. And what I'm going to do, Cindy, is I am going to, because I don't have all their bios, and I think who knows themselves better than one individually. So before we get into the dialogue, I would love, Heather, if you could just do a brief introduction and your background, and then we'll ask Wendy, and then we'll go to Gary, and then I'll turn it to questions. Is that okay, Cindy?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Heather, on screen.
Great, thanks. Hopefully you can all hear me. Not? Okay, great, thanks. So I'm Heather Tulk, and as you see on the slide, I'm the Managing Director of BioScript. BioScript Solutions is a national network of specialty pharmacy, nursing clinic, and patient support programs across the country. I just joined that organization last fall. Prior to that, I have had an extensive career and have held C-suite in positions in 3 publicly traded Canadian companies and in telecommunications and transportation and finance. So, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. A huge believer in the value of diversity in all its forms.
Thank you, Heather. Wendy.
Sure, I'm a professor at Ryerson and I lead the Diversity Institute and have worked on issues related to gender and diversity for many years.
Thank you, Wendy. Good to see you again. Gary. I saw him earlier.
Hi, there. That would help, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'm a family man. I've got 2 children, 23 and 15-year-old. When I'm not working, I love golf, tennis, fishing, cottaging. You can probably tell from behind I'm at my cottage at the moment. I'm presently an advisor with Clearview Advisory. It's an M&A consulting firm. Since 99, I've been a president or CEO for a variety of companies, including Bell Distribution, Grand and Toy, Office Max out of Chicago, Worldlinks Wireless, Budget Car Truck Rental, and a few others. I originally started my career as a city planner. So I'm one of those gentlemen that said, well, I can do that and I'll try something else. And so I went from city planning into business. So I don't know what that all means, but I did it. I went to Waterloo in Queens for my degrees. And for the last 13 years, I'm proud to say that I've been a entrepreneur, quite successful, raised 130 million, bought 13 companies, eventually sold it to Bell Canada about 4 years ago. And I sit on a variety of boards, mostly private or nonprofits, such as the Stratford Festival in Canada, Kids Help Phone Line, or Rogers School of Retail Management at Ryerson, no longer, but I used to, and Junior Achievement. So that's it for me.
Wonderful. So thank you, Wendy, Gary, and Heather for your background. You can see we've got a really diverse group of individuals with different backgrounds and experiences. So I'm going to kick off the conversations with a question, and I think I'll try to get each and every one of you, because Cindy, I think we're good for time right now.
Yes.
So I think getting the collective thoughts is all about diversity and inclusion. So let's kick off with the first question. What initiatives are you involved in to advance leadership in diversity and inclusivity in Canada? And Heather, we're going to start with you because I know you've got your company that you're the managing director. So maybe can you speak to what recruiting practices you have at BioScript or any of the boards, any of your previous companies? But I think the most immediate would be where you're working today.
Yeah. Well, so certainly both in my paid career and also my volunteer career. I'm very involved in diversity in a number of factors. I currently chair the Toronto chapter of the International Women's Forum, which of course is all about the mission of the organization is advancing women's leadership and championing diversity worldwide. And I'm also on the board of Canadian Hearing Services, and we do a lot thinking through how there can be more access for people with disabilities into the workplace. So that's very interesting. But in my day job, we have a number of practices in place to try and continue to advance diversity in our organization. I would say and the first step in that is really making sure that people from diverse groups can see themselves in the room. So we pay a lot of attention to making sure that our leadership, starting with our leadership, is diverse. We actually have a board that's a third women, and our senior leadership team. So myself as so basically directors, vice presidents, and myself as the CEO. We're currently 50% women and 20% people of visible minorities. So, and we pay close attention to that, and we really make sure that at every level of the organization, we're making sure we're unlocking positions of leadership, both for the things that you mentioned, Deborah, and some of the other people who've spoken earlier, that we believe very much that diverse organizations are more successful and we get better thoughts and we get better solutions and it drives better success in our business, but also so that people, when they look at our organization, can see themselves and can see that this is a place where they would fit, a place where they would belong. We also have a task force that's run by our team members and chaired by 2 of our team members on diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity. And that task force works regularly and is an advisory group to the senior leadership team in terms of what we could be doing more to make sure there aren't any barriers, and to make sure that the programs and operating environment that we have in place is diverse and inclusive. The third thing is we've actually embedded diversity and inclusion directly in our strategy. So in our corporate strategy that we publish obviously with our team members, but also use in our recruitment, as you mentioned, one of our strategic objectives is a diverse and inclusive workplace, and we communicate that in all of our recruiting practices, and make sure that we're casting as wide a net as possible to make sure that people understand that they can succeed and belong in our organization. And I think that for us, it's not just about, and I think for most organizations that are paying attention to this, it's not just about the percentage of people that you have in your group that are diverse. It's, do they feel that they have the opportunity to fully contribute? Do they believe they have an opportunity to thrive? And do they feel that their voice is valued? And so that's what we spend most of our time dialoguing on and making sure. And we also ask the team. So we just actually recently, just 2 weeks ago, finished our latest round of diversity questionnaire to all of our team members to ensure to take a pulse and understand the environment, and have them self-identify any barriers that they see or anything that they believe stands in the way of their success, so we can action it.
Excellent. So lots of great initiatives, Heather, and you're certainly a leader leading the way. So thank you. I'm going to kind of carry on that question with you, Gary. As leaders, as either CEOs building future leaders, how have you ensured diversity and inclusion in your organizations? I think you said that you had 130, I don't know, was it 13 companies that you invested in? I think that was the number I heard. So how do you, like, what's your experience with in all the various roles that you've played? Which ones would you say you'd like to highlight with respect to diversity and inclusion?
Thank you. Well, it was 13 companies that we bought.
Okay, bought. I knew 13 was there. It's my favorite number.
Yeah, it is mine too. And we smashed them together. And I use the word smash because that's what was required. But normally I'm hired because I'm a change agent or transformation kind of guy. So when I go into a company, it's usually not working very well. So I don't have the luxury of sitting back and watching diversity just grow, because usually it's not there. And when I talk about diversity, I'm not talking simply, and not to downplaying the importance of women, but I'm talking about diversity in all aspects of it. So I usually have a 3-step process in that, and it really is about starting a dialogue. So I'm a believer in selling rather than telling people what to do. So it starts with an open discussion, explanation. Try to identify some of the opportunities that the company is missing, real solid business opportunities that the company's missing. So some of the blind spots that we're missing in the marketplace because we're not diverse, or educating the staff, educating the employees, using examples of really top performing companies with diversity, talking to the board and the management team, having town hall meetings about it, educating the staff. So I slowly try to introduce it and show examples so that people can start to, so it starts to get some roots. But it doesn't stop there, because if you do stop there, I don't think it's going to go any further. So it has to be a continuous discussion. And I think these discussions need to move, and I usually try to do this, is try to move it from people tolerating differences versus embracing differences. And there's a real big difference, you know. We all know people say, yeah, I like him, but, you know, and leave it at that. So it's really from tolerating to embracing is the movement that I have to see in place. And then you've got to basically walk the talk. So you've got the discussion happening in the company, so people start to understand it, how we can get better. Then you got to walk the talk, and that means how are you going to embed it in the company and make it a measurable issue? How are you going to move the needle, and are you going to measure that needle? So, and I try to do it in business plans and strategy documents, measuring our progress, celebrating wins. It could be an individual win, it can be a team win, it can be a company win, but where diversity has helped us improve our results. So, and with that, eventually we can educate all our stakeholders. And that unfortunately takes way more time than any of us would like, but it's just unfortunately the reality of it. Now, I think we can speed it up. But if I may take a moment, give you an example of that. Cindy knows I love to tell stories, and those on the call that know me, I love to tell stories as a way of showing what can happen. So 25 years ago, I was hired as the chief operating officer for a privately held company. They owned a number of brands. And I was like 2 to 3 weeks into the position when the owner came up to me and said, "Hey, Gary, we're having a Christmas party another week, and we'd like you and Pam, your wife, to come." And I said, "Great, I'm looking forward to it." So I showed up. Unfortunately, it wasn't well attended. Everything about this party, though, screamed Christmas. I mean, we had Christmas trees up there, multiple trees. We had a Santa Claus giving out gifts. We had the garland out there. We had Bing Crosby music singing "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas." I mean, we did the whole thing, even to the point where they were giving out frozen turkeys to every person that came to the party at the end of the party to take home with them. And so that's okay, but the owner then, I realized he was a bit upset because this was many years of having this party, but not a lot of attendance to it. So he was very disappointed in this. And so I got talking to him and I said, "Well, listen, leave it with me for a few days and let me come back to you." Long story short, I got a group of people together. Oh, I should tell you this is important. I realized that 32% of our staff were either Muslims or Hindus. So Christmas didn't really resonate with them. To make it even worse, our owner decided to have the Christmas party at a synagogue. So can you imagine? We've got Christians, we've got Jews, we've got Hindus, we've got Muslims, and we're at a synagogue celebrating. And he's wondering why we're not getting a lot of people to it. Now, the reality is, I got to give him kudos for, hey, talk about diversity. That was diversity at its best. It's got everything in there. But unfortunately, like so many problems with diversity, is that you need some kind of glue to make it stick. And the glue wasn't the Christmas party. So we set up some subcommittees and brought the diversity in and said, "How do you want to do this?" And the result was fantastic. The result was the following. We gave them a budget, we gave them money, and we supported. The following year, we had a celebration party. It wasn't a Christmas party. We rented a hall. We had people dress up in their national attire. We had individual food stations that reflected their culture and their nationality. We brought flags in. We had something like 16, 17 flags representing the various countries. And sure enough, the attendance went up that next year, and it went up the year after, and it's been going up ever since. So I think the owner was very happy, and it worked out well. But my point in this is that he did the diversity thing. We had a lot of diverse people there, but it still wasn't working. So we can't lose sight of the fact that you need to also have some kind of glue to keep it all together. So I'll give you an idea of an analogy of it. Diversity on its own is not sustainable. That's my belief. However, diversity is like a mix. It's like a cake mix or making cement. You can take the cement and put it into a bucket or a wheelbarrow and mix it all day long, but it doesn't stick. There's something else that's missing, and that is water. Okay, and that's the inclusivity. Those two that's what will make the mix work, and you need those two. So,
thank you, Gary.
Yep.
You're a great storyteller. Thank you. Wendy, we're going to turn it to you, and know that you're involved in a lot of different initiatives, moving this forward, and you've been doing this for years. Would you like to share what you're most proud of and what's in the works today?
Well, I guess I'll start by just saying that, our focus is on data-driven change. And that's at the broad societal level. It's also looking at organizations and even to a certain extent individuals. So we're researchers, and everything we do is sort of based on the data, and we've been collecting the data for a really long time. And probably the one thing that we sort of added to the conversation is moving beyond gender to making sure that we're looking at the broader ranges of diversity. So I think probably one of the things I'm most proud of is the Diversity Leads project, where we showed, for example, in the city of Toronto, when you looked, and I mentioned this when I spoke, when you looked at women on boards, as has been mentioned, women are underrepresented. I actually think that going from 12 to 20%, which is what, is that an 80% increase over 5 years? It's not bad. And if we continue that trajectory, 5 more years we could be close to parity. But what we found is in the city of Toronto, where half the population is racialized, meaning for every white woman, there's racialized women, white women outnumbered racialized women 12-1 on boards, where they're 1-1 in the population. So a lot of the work that we've done has been on trying to shift the conversation to that more intersectional approach. And, as you know, working with IWF, it's done a great job to advance women in leadership and celebrate women leaders and so on, but it wasn't very diverse. And I think some of the initiatives that have been undertaken are going to drive difference. The data that we produced from Diversity Leads actually went into Bill C-25, and that's why initially it was comply or explain legislation, just like the Ontario Securities Commission, which only focused on women. And we were able to get the definition of diversity changed. So now it's women, racialized people, Indigenous people, and people with disabilities. And, my argument is if all you do is exchange the white men for white women in Canada, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think, those are the kinds of things that I'm most proud of, is how we can take the data, we can take the insights, we can take the research on best practices and actually translate it into things that make a change. Federal government has recently come out with, as you know, the comply or explain legislation, kind of reframed as the 50-30 challenge. It's a little bit like the 30% club, and I think lots of people around the table know what that is, where corporate leaders have pledged to increase the participation of women to 30%. 50-30 challenge is focused on gender parity, that's the 50%, and increasing diversity, which is the 30%. It's not legislation, it's a voluntary challenge that people can sign up to. But I think it will, there are about 700 organizations, I think, that have signed up so far. And we're working hard to try to encourage more, recognizing it's very aspirational. If you look at SMEs, 50-30 is a really long way off. If you look at the corporate zeros, and there's still a lot of boards that have no women, especially in resources, mining, and so on. Getting to 50% is kind of a pipe dream, but trying to encourage this notion that we can continuously do better, I think is super important. And, I'm really happy about the work that we do with a lot of the equity seeking groups like the Black Business Professional Association, trying to, a lot of the women leaders are not going to make it from where they are to a corporate board, but certainly they can get plugged into some of the networks. They can start working on skill sets. They can start getting relevant education and being promoted. And that's really important. We do a lot of sponsoring of women and diverse people. We have a database now because of the Diversity Leads project of, well, I think it's close to 20,000 leaders and board members across sectors. So it's not just corporate, it's also nonprofit and universities and hospitals. And some of you have heard me say, You know, I've chaired boards of startups. I've chaired boards of nonprofits, and I chaired Women's College Hospital Board and was on the board at Ryerson. And managing a university or a hospital, way, way, way tougher than managing a lot of, you know, mid-sized private sector companies. And yet there's an assumption for corporate boards that only corporate experience counts. You know, hospitals love corporate people, but corporate boards don't value the experience people have from hospitals.
Actually, Wendy, I'd like to comment on that. Wendy, I'd like to comment on that. Last year, we worked on a board shortlist service with a public company in the cannabis sector. And one of the requirements they said is we would really love to have someone that came out of a complex organization in a leadership role or a board role, i.e. hospital, i.e. university. So I don't think it's, I think the experience sometimes speaks more for itself than the definition of where someone comes from. So I just wanted to use that as an example. And I hear that quite often as well. So I just, you know, I'm kind of in the trenches working with, you know, executive chairs, chairs of nominating governance committees on the corporate side, but they are opening because they realize that they need to go deeper than, you know, the set skills that they would normally. So, not to cut you off, Wendy, but Cindy, I know you've got a really, I realized that our first question took 20 minutes. And we have 2 more questions, but Cindy, I'm going to turn it to you as to how you want to manage going forward, because I know you've got a 5 o'clock stop.
Yeah, first of all, I really want to respect everybody's time, and I know everybody's, you know, it's also it's Friday, right? What I'd like to do is just to, rather than go into the Zoom room, because we won't have time, I'd just like to open it up to everybody that's here. And feel free to ask a question. You can direct your question to maybe one person so we can get a few voices in. And let's see if we can get as many questions answered, you know, in the next sort of 6 minutes. My closing comments are very brief. So, you know, I still like to stay and wrap up by 5:05 max. So let's just keep it open rather than go to the Zoom rooms. But, you know, let's move with that. So any questions from anybody that's here?
Andrew? Hi.
Yeah, go for it, Andrew.
All right. So this is only anecdotal on my part. It's not data driven, but is there a sort of a hidden systemic issue with the diversity of domain expertise or skill in women as they rise through the executive rank up into boards? For example, are a disproportionately number of them all from the CFO side or the HR side? And women who are coming from other diverse areas where men get the opportunity of coming in through every possible entry point. And is that getting addressed in some way or some fashion? To anybody, I'm not asking.
Wendy, you're the data queen. What are you seeing?
No, I think it's such a good observation when you look at the pathways to whether you're talking about CEOs or boards. There are certain roles that are valued. VP of HR is not, for the most part. And when women make it to the C-suite, very often it's up through the functions that are not really valued as pathways. You see it at universities, you see it at hospitals, you see it in the corporate sector. So it's a really astute observation, I think, that men are given. They say that women are hired or promoted based on demonstrated competence and men on potential. And I think very often men are given the benefit of the doubt and women aren't.
Yeah, Wendy, if I just add on to that, I don't have it in terms of a data or statistic, but certainly in nominating and governance committees that I've been on, I would definitely say that when men are being presented, the thing that I've observed is they'll look at someone, say it's Gary, and they'll say, oh, he did that, so therefore he can do all these other things. And when women are presented, the nominating committee often glooms on the very last job that person did and said, oh, well, we don't need a customer service expert on the board. And I've been in the position saying, well, Yes, but before she was a customer service expert, she led their audit team, or she led their risk committee, or she led this, or she did that. And they really don't dig down deep, and they just go on the one defining term, job title, and assume that's all she brings to the table, and so they're not given the benefit of the doubt of the other breadth of experiences that they may have had, or that they can bring, or their potential to contribute. So I think there's definitely a bias there that I've observed that I think really needs to be tested all the time when you're in those discussions. And, you know, as Deborah said earlier, I think anyone who's involved in those discussions has an obligation to step forward and challenge that assumption. And I think, and Wendy, I think it was a panel you were on, I saw a number of months ago that one of the other people on the panel used the term of looking around the room and seeing who's missing. And I think it's incumbent on everyone to be always looking around the room and saying who's missing and why. Why is this room all men? Why is this room all white? Why is this room all heterosexual? Why is, you know, and really challenging, how did we end up here? Because for sure there are barriers. And if you're in a room in this day and age where women have been 50% of business schools for 20 years, where there's tons of visible racialized people with incredible skills and experiences, where the marketplace in Canada and Toronto in particular are so diverse. If you're sitting in a room that's all white or all male, or only has one woman, or only has one racialized person, it's incumbent on you to challenge everyone in the room as to how that happened. How did we get here, and what do we do about it?
So I'm just looking at the composition of our panel. We're diverse in thoughts, but we're not diverse in racial here. And so, Cindy, I would definitely challenge the next group of speakers that you bring in and panelists, that we dig a little deeper from that, because I'm sitting here and we're talking about it, but we're not walking the talk.
And can I just
and interestingly enough, that quote I just gave you, Wendy will remember, of looking around the room and seeing who's missing, actually came from a woman of color. And I was so inspired by it. I thought it was exactly right.
Well, and it's Black History Month.
Yeah.
Right. Can I just add to the diversity of thinking? I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I don't have the corporate credentials. I've been a CEO twice, taken a company public, doesn't seem to be enough. So we got all these laggard companies that don't understand data, they don't understand innovation, but they keep hiring people like themselves that are going to keep them stuck in this laggard behavior, completely missing what's going on in the new economy. So it's not just, sometimes we get wrapped up in the external version of diversity, but the diversity of logic, the diversity of thought, the diversity of debate. Like, we've got to start really digging deep into our definition and how we add all of those ingredients.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that the other thing is diversity of brand. And what I mean by that is people putting boards together, if they don't recognize the name of the company, then they're not interested in you. And so that also disproportionately impacts people with entrepreneurial backgrounds or small startup backgrounds or innovative backgrounds.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I was trying to look to see who was speaking because I couldn't find you. Who just asked the question?
It was MK that was speaking.
MK, hello MK, long time.
I know.
What I would say is I'm an entrepreneur, and I would never have been on any executive recruiting roster for board work. I can tell you that. It's all been my network, and I started in venture capital. So I would say that don't expect to be in the typical search firm pipeline or databases. Your network is really going to be where you're going to leverage and let your network know. So I do come from that entrepreneur background, and I would definitely have been looked over. But thank goodness for my network. Most of my opportunities came through my network. So I just wanted to comment on that, that it shouldn't be a barrier. It may not be RBC or CIBC that's calling you, but look at all the work that you've done. Like, I've got a board, I'm working with an executive recruiting firm right now. We're partnering on a board search, and it's a technology public company, and they want somebody who's had huge high growth in the technology sector. And, you know, you're not necessarily going to get that out of a corporate individual. So I'm just saying, I like to think outside the box, and I think there's a lot of outside the box thinking opportunities.
Yeah, I agree with you. Deb, I agree with you. I'm on a bunch of tech boards, Fujitsu, Japanese boards, and things like that. The companies that need people that think differently seem resistant to having us on their boards.
Well, we'll just work harder, one board at a time, MK.
Okay, Deb.
I'm going to, first of all, thank Deborah and our esteemed panel with Heather and Wendy and Gary and all of the other speakers that we've had before. I'd like, Deborah, if you've got a couple of closing comments, you know, on your panel, I'll pass the baton to you, and then I'll have some brief closing remarks so we can, you know, close up close to the top of the hour here.
Okay, well, thank you. What I will say and what I've seen is, you know, I think there's been a lot of pledges, and I'm not going to point fingers at anyone, but 30% Club, case in point, you know, they wanted to have 30% of representation of women around the boardroom table. A lot of people pledged, a lot of people signed up. I'm not sure exactly where they are today, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. So we can pledge all we want, but I think it has to be individuals. I've said that, and Gary used the word, you're a change agent. We all can be change agents, and we shouldn't rely on numbers and data. We should do it because it is the right thing. The data is good because it proves that, you know, things are being measured, but at the same time, pledges, you know, soft, compliant, explain are not moving the needle. We need to step up, and those organizations, I think Black North Initiative has had some great successes. I think they've got some great targets. I hope it all comes to fruition, but we all can collectively work together. And that's really what I would say is, you know, and I think there's simple things like putting term limits, putting age limits on, and creating a renewal mechanism that's going to create change within boards. And I had an example of a board that on a mining company, the 90-year-old board member was coming off, and that was forcing change. And I asked the question, did he stay awake for most of the board meetings? And I don't mean that disrespectfully, because they didn't have an age or a term limit. So those are renewal mechanisms that everyone can create as part of their culture, as part of their own policies. You don't have to rely on government or legislation to put that in place.
Thank you, Deborah, for those closing comments. Just a few acknowledgements. I'd just like to thank all of our speakers that we've had today, and just to let you know on next steps, we are going to you know, take the video and we're going to clip them into smaller portions, and then they're going to be on YouTube. And so hopefully then you can maybe share some of the content out, because obviously we had a lot of depth. You know, we started off with Margie talking about having courage. Obviously, she's been doing international research on the ways women lead, and also, you know, looking at how men lead as well, based on her most recent research. And, you know, as you can see, she's well published. She's got tons of energy, and, you know, she's back here, you know, being brave and being bold and encouraging all of us to, you know, we can change it if we dare, is kind of one of her underlying messages. Siobhan gave us just an incredible perspective of not only some of her own personal journey, but actually the blatant constructs of look all around us, and the subtleties and the images, maybe in our websites, maybe in our day-to-day practices. And, you know, Deborah did a really good call out in the sense that here I am without not having a diverse set of speakers. So, you know, I'm going to call on you to help me there. It might be a reflection that I just don't have the network, right? Because what I've been doing with this is really wrapping my arms around friends or people that I just haven't had a chance to speak because of COVID, and kind of keeping this very more on the quiet side in many respects. But I do recognize the point, and it's a very astute observation, Deborah. And then moving into the speakers that we had, I know we would have loved more stories from Gary and Heather and Wendy's. Just in our last session, we made the mistake where Wendy spoke. We didn't have the opportunity to tape it. Maybe worthwhile redoing that presentation, Wendy, because it was full of rich context, and also all the, you know, research initiatives that you have. As I mentioned before, we're going to do this again May 18th. I'm going to ensure that I work hard, and if you've got any ideas of another story that demonstrates courage, as I started off in the beginning, my dear friend Roger is going to speak about your voice as your most powerful instrument. If you were in the breakout with him, you would have heard his passion and his joy and his enthusiasm, and I know that you will all learn something. And we don't rehearse enough. And Gary, you're a masterful storyteller, and you know the power of how words can move people to emotion. And also by using our voice in very specific ways, we can move people to outcomes. And we are on a change journey. The stats in this area are not changing. I was disappointed to hear the regulators, Deborah, are not putting in a position like other countries have, in Norway in particular. The evidence is there. So it behooves each of us in our circles to lead and make a difference, and look around and know that the accountability really starts with each of us doing what we can. So this is my little way of bringing you all together, encouraging stories, conversations, and I'll work really hard to bring a more diverse community to these dialogues. It's going to take all of us. And, with a young daughter who's now just turned 31 and just got married, and as she looks forward, I'd like to know that we really have moved the bar. I mean, we've talked that in 5 years we may get there. I'm not so sure. I think sometimes when I look at the speed of change, it's far too slow. And that means we all have to, as I said in the series, have far more courage. So on that point, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I'll try again tomorrow. Persistency is very key in being tenacious. So enjoy your weekend, keep growing, be more bold, and have far more courage. Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend.